It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I'm Geoff Firebuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch each Wednesday at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. Well, let's wrap things up with the 2017 to 2018 animated Godzilla trilogy available here in North America and other regions through Netflix. This third entry, The Planet Eater, is the one that I'm not sure if this was the one that was best received. I think it's the one that people thought was maybe had some of the more interesting concepts, but maybe not necessarily the best overall when it comes to these three films. For a lot of people, these films are quite disappointing, and I can kind of understand. Yeah, this trilogy has a lot of mixed reactions from the fans, and I can't say that I love them myself. It's like a weird conglomeration of kaiju, in this case our most famous of all kaiju, Godzilla, and a sci-fi far future Japanese adult animation series. I don't want to say that it's like any one particular series, because I think there's an entire genre of these types of militarized sci-fi action series that this is maybe playing off of the most. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the general feeling that I have about these as I wrap things up. But the point is, there's been this weird mesh to kind of come out of this combination of concepts. On one hand, it's fascinating and not entirely difficult to accept, but on the other, you have a story of its own that doesn't need Godzilla to make that story interesting, but it's called Godzilla, so you're feeling a little shortchanged on the Godzilla action. Either way, these three movies are not really a waste. There are contemplative concepts in each movie as well as the trilogy as a whole, and that was something that the filmmaker seemingly wanted to portray. And I am positive that there are fans of this trilogy out there who will defend these films to the grave. But let's dive in and finish this out. First, I'm going to do a quick recap, but also understand that as I get into the story of this third movie, there's a lot really going on here, and there's a lot that you may not even remember from the previous movies if you don't watch them all at once or all in a short time frame. In a way, I kind of wish I had done these three movies as a single episode as opposed to 3 episodes carried out over several months. It was on me. But anyway, for this recap, humans have left Earth because of a super powerful, super large Godzilla and other monsters, basically making coexistence impossible. Humans, along with the help of 2 other alien species who are also displaced due to monsters of their own, doing basically the same thing Godzilla was doing to us, are trying to basically find a new planet to call home. However, tensions are rising, and one of those alien partners are basically religious zealots who fled after Ghidorah destroyed their home world. The other group are much more of a brute force civilization who basically resort to assimilating themselves into their own technology to reach a sort of singularity with weapons and of war, and in particular something that they called, or that they designed, called Mecha Godzilla. It was a whole thing that led to some betrayal on the part of that group. Now, going into this final chapter, there have been 2 confrontations between our civilizations that are looking to reclaim Earth and Godzilla. Both of these confrontations have ended with massive damage and casualties, but they are not yet wiped out. And one other thing I do want to bring up here about this recap also, because of the way that faster than light or near light travel works in reality, is that the faster you travel through space, the more time will pass. And what happened was that the humans left Earth looking for a new planet, came up with nothing, decided to go back to Earth thinking that it would only be 10,000 years later, and surely Godzilla will have died by then. And they get back and it was 20,000 years, and Godzilla is still around and bigger and more powerful than he ever had been. So that is something else to keep in mind. They are trying to actually reclaim Earth from Godzilla, but they kind of get trapped and they get stuck and they're running short on hope. And it's a pretty bleak situation that everybody is in. So this final chapter opens with our kind of lead religious zealot, Metphys, the member of the Exiv race who aligned with humanity shortly before Godzilla forced everyone off Earth. And he's discussing how the Exiv have been closely watching and studying humanity throughout all of humanity's history, and how their spirit and what they basically call free will is kind of an exception to the rule in the universe according to their travels. He has much to say about how beings tend not to hear the words spoken directly from a godlike figure, but they only hear words of God through a filter of another of their kind. So a hero is basically needed for humans to follow and embrace those words of a higher being. And that hero, Metphys concludes, has to be our main character in this entire trilogy, Haruo. Now, in the aftermath of the last attack by Godzilla, the giant monster is currently hibernating. One of the team monitoring Godzilla, Dr. Martin, ponders if maybe humans were simply tools to nurture the planet in order to birth the giant monsters that ultimately forced them off planet. So essentially humans are not as important as they believe themselves to be in the grand scheme of things. We're not quite the top of the food chain, if you will. Meanwhile, the humans now see the potential betrayal by the other group of aliens, the technology-based aliens, the Bilisolato. Now, there's distrust shown, or basically sown into the shaky alliance. Humans now believe that the nanotech in Mechagodzilla City from the last movie was the invasion weapon for the Bilisolato to use against humanity to take over the Earth for their own. Those who follow the Exiv see Haruo as a divine hero who somehow saw past the nanotech enhancements to remain human and save the rest who were not assimilated into Mechagodzilla City in the previous film. Now, while several are believing that Haruo's actions are nothing short of a miracle, and it's converting several humans to the Exiv religion, what's actually discovered by Dr. Martin as he speaks privately to Haruo is that the natives of Earth treated each of the people who were not assimilated by the Bilisolato tech. Metphys knows this already and basically is using this actual medical and scientific reason why they were not taken over by that nanotech as some sort of divine act that was created by Haruo's sheer humanity and sheer desire to defeat Godzilla for the human race, to give hope to that attack's survivors from the previous movie. Metphys then reveals that the plans to call the Exiv god to Earth to destroy Godzilla, and he says that humanity doesn't have the maturity to understand God as a real concept. The Bilisolato trust in tech and humans trust in courage. The Exiv will solve the issue with God. Now, when asked why they didn't do something to defeat Godzilla all this time if they had this on their side, Metphys simply says that he needed someone to present themselves with the proper amount of hatred for Godzilla so that they can stand at the altar and basically fuel the Exiv god to kill Godzilla. Haruo's frustration and anger and hatred has now boiled to the point that he is useful to this end. And I will say, just kind of as a side note here, this doesn't really quite play out like we're presented this in this scene. I don't know if there was maybe a rewrite that came along, but Haruo is important in one regard, but he's not actually the vessel that is used on this altar like Metphys says he's going to be. It's really kind of weird. By the way, the Exiv god, as revealed in the last movie, is Ghidorah, a version of Ghidorah, no less, that is more cosmic, more powerful, and more dangerous than ever seen before. So that's not such great news. What's actually kind of worse is that the tensions between the humans and the Billosolato on the mothership that's orbiting Earth, waiting to find out if they can actually land and take back Earth, that's beyond repair at this point. Unless the human leaders place all the blame for the failure of Mechagodzilla on Haruo, they'll no longer work with the humans and demand that all of their demands basically are met, or they will continue to escalate hostilities. They've actually shut down power on the ship, and it's forced to basically run off of battery power to keep everyone alive. Now, on Earth, to protect Haruo, Dr. Martin has worked out a plan with the native twin girls, Maina and Miana. And Miana tries to understand what Haruo has experienced when they take him into hiding, and attempts to basically make love with him to basically kind of combine spirits with him, to basically heal his spirits, as she kind of says. It's very, they speak in very different terms that sound familiar, but it means something different to that society, which is an interesting concept. It really boils down their kind of concepts of what winning and losing actually means to them. Winning being offspring, losing means to die. There's a lot of interesting stuff with these natives that I feel like don't quite work out all the way through to their potential conclusion. But either which way, Haruo refuses Miana. Now, when Maina comes to Haruo to offer the same connection, he realizes that she was actually the twin who saved him at the end of the first movie, and that they actually have this kind of completely different bond, and they do end up making love. While that's going on, Miana learns that Metphys and the Exif have always been able to communicate telepathically, and they can read minds, and they have been using that against their allies all along. He then captures her to use in his ritual that will ultimately call Ghidorah to Earth to destroy Godzilla. And as the Exif perform their sermons both on the ship orbiting Earth and on Earth, it's a ploy to essentially power Ghidorah by consuming the followers as a shadow creature on Earth and ultimately destroying the ship in orbit as Ghidorah partially emerges from a singularity that has opened near the ship that's in orbit. So I guess the humans on board the ship don't have to worry about the Billosolato uprising on there anymore, because there is no more ship. That happens. I'm going to talk more about that scene later, because it is actually a pretty cool scene. Anyway, Ghidorah's attack against the orbiting ship and its ultimate explosion begins to disperse energy into Earth's atmosphere and creates 3 storms that essentially act as singularities to signal the arrival of Ghidorah on Earth. It also awakens the hibernating Godzilla. And basically right away, Godzilla decides he's not going to mess around with this new arrival and begins to charge up one of his atomic blasts. As one of the single necks of Ghidorah starts to come through one of those singularities in the atmosphere, Godzilla fires at it, but that blast is ultimately bent and deflected by Ghidorah's own gravity manipulation, and in retaliation, Ghidorah bites Godzilla, but Godzilla can't physically attack Ghidorah. Ghidorah's other 2 necks come through their portals and attack Godzilla as well. The humans are also struggling with this because they're not able to pick up any readings from Ghidorah. They can see it, they can hear it, they know it's there, just like Godzilla does, but no readings, or if they were to go up and try to touch Ghidorah, it's not corporeal in our existence. And Maina tells them that this is Ghidorah, the king of the void, and the creature that will ultimately destroy everything. And she picks that up with a telepathic link to her twin sister, who's learned that from Metphys. Now, Metphys explains to Haruo that the Exif have seen this play out time and again on planets that they've visited throughout history. They basically make these planets offerings to Ghidorah as like their god. And some Exif are saved while others go forth to be consumed by the offerings as well. So yeah, they're a death cult. They got to that once they basically discovered back in their technological days the ability to view the future. And what the Exif discovered is that the universe is finite. There is no infinity. They came to the conclusion that they needed to be okay with the fact that everything ends. So why not actually actively contribute to the ending of all life? Metphis found Haruo as a child and knew that the hero essentially prayed for it all to end through his anger and his frustration about Godzilla. So Metphis basically fostered that growing desire for the end of Haruo's suffering. And now, here we are. Meanwhile, the last of the humans and the natives discover that Metphis is the one who's actually guiding Ghidorah through this portal from a different dimension to be able to attack Godzilla, despite Godzilla not being able to fight back. So they have to defeat and sever basically the tether to this world that Metphis is controlling. Maina takes Dr. Martin to the native's god, which happens to be an egg that harbors Mothra. Now they are able to deliver a message telepathically to Haruo that Metphis is controlling Ghidorah, and also Mothra is used in that telepathic messaging as well. Metphis reveals to Haruo that if he gives his soul as a hero, Ghidorah will become a divine reality in this universe, and Haruo resists this concept and breaks that connection between Metphis and Ghidorah, allowing Godzilla to fight back to destroy this planet eater and all of the portals into this dimension. Earth is saved, but Godzilla remains. The small number of humans that remain on Earth have no place else to go and discard their tech and weapons, where the Earth, over time, eventually swallows it, and they basically integrate into the natives' culture. Time passes. Haruo and Maina are expecting a child. Dr. Martin reveals that he's mastered the Bilisolato nanotech and wants to use it to restore civilization as they had it, to basically leave behind this primitive life. Realizing that this is part of what Metphis was telling him about how this technology will always lead to death and destruction and suffering, and that the natives of Earth don't actually have or harbor a hatred of this giant monster that is Godzilla, and see it as basically part of nature, like a tornado or a hurricane or, whatever. Haruo takes the last remaining technologies the humans have on Earth and provokes Godzilla to kill him and destroy it as well, to basically protect this new humanity on Earth that has a different view of their way of life and their surroundings. In a post-credit scene, years have passed and a ritual is taking place at an effigy that serves as a way to learn and reflect in the cautionary tale that was the human's desire to continuously evolve to fear being removed from the top of the food chain. Alright, so let's get to the three things I do like about the Planet Eater. First, while the entire trilogy is extremely heavy on human stuff, there is something very interesting in this movie in particular, and that's these kind of political treaties between three very different civilizations ultimately breaking down. This whole concept of one group being mostly bullheaded while another relies on tech, and the third claiming to have this higher sensibility to actually not just understand God, but can kind of will it to their aid on a whim, is interesting. If not sort of in the wrong series to distract from this monster business. Generally speaking, all this does work in a narrative, but how do you handle something that's bigger than everything you could possibly ever know or perceive? If you break things down to your courage or reliance on something more scientific or spiritual, and maybe don't combine all of those different concepts and ideas, you're likely not going to succeed in overcoming that turmoil or beast or whatever it is that you're fighting against. So in one regard, this sort of tug at these three different facets of what a person or a being could potentially embody could be a very interesting through line in a movie, or even better, a TV series. It's a tad undercut by Ghidorah being so horrifically brutal and all-powerful. Man, it also completely and totally kills all drama between two of these factions on board the spaceship, when you basically kill everyone so very quickly. But imagine if this was an ongoing series where you have all of these different factions and ideas and perspectives, and within a group, and within each group, I should say, you find people who are sympathetic to another group, or working against their own, or working against everyone, etc. What I'm saying is that this pondering about what makes an intelligent being, and then what makes up that being's entire civilization on the macro level, is something well worth exploring. Exploring it in 3 movies and having it all come to a head very quickly in the 3rd movie makes it a little harder to swallow when it finally plays out, while not having much going on with our title monster, Godzilla. Still, there's a nugget of a concept here that is actually quite interesting, and is something that helps you kind of explore more of the themes in the trilogy that does kind of become a little bit more obvious and in the forefront in this movie in particular. Second, to kind of piggyback on the big moment in the midway point of this movie that does something both really neat while also kind of sucks the air out of some of the other events going on in the movie itself, but still totally rules. Ghidorah's reveal and just how utterly powerful and deadly he is pretty swell. We knew that Ghidorah destroyed the Exif world, so when their plan is finally revealed to essentially call forth Ghidorah to not just put an end to Godzilla, but also carry out their plans as a death cult who worships one of the most horrible things in the universe, it builds very nicely. And especially in that moment that Ghidorah comes along and harvests lives. But what's more, on Earth, is, as a shadow creature, it's chopping people up in a fairly grotesque manner. In space, it is warping reality and time. People on the bridge of the ship are learning of their deaths before it actually happens, as readings and messages are received all out of order. It's actually a pretty scary moment. Not only are you totally confused by the singularity opening up right next to you, but then 1, it begins to shift its gravitational properties. 2, it has this golden light monster's neck come out of it and start squeezing the ship. And then 3, it tells you you've already died and have to wait for it to actually happen, is pretty brutal and kind of amazing as a terrifying Godzilla moment. Hell, it's perhaps the most outright scariest moment in all the Godzilla movies ever made. And it's all because one group essentially lies to another about a miracle that it actually isn't one. Thirdly, I do like how this trilogy comes to an end. There's a whole segment in this movie I didn't really get too much detail about that deals with Metphies revealing to Haruo how the Exif came to embrace their death cult religion. I mentioned how they used technology that allowed them to peer into the future and realize that the universe will ultimately end, so they might as well help transition that in the attempt to basically end the long suffering of existence and so forth. And I mentioned how Metphies basically shepherded the hatred that Haruo had for Godzilla to build it to the point that he could be used as a religious hero to bring enough people to the side of the Exif to basically power Ghidorah. Now, this is all accomplished with Metphies using this token of sorts that pulls Ghidorah into this reality, and it also kind of soups up his telepathy and basically trap Haruo in this void where Metphies is able to manipulate his memories and forcing him to use his own courage to not give up his life to basically allow Ghidorah to destroy everything. And that calls back to basically what the Exif think of humanity. But What he learns is to let go of technology and civilization as he knew it. The only thing he really was fighting for. So while he wanted things to be the way they were as he heard it from his grandparents and parents, the pursuit was hollow if it would ultimately always lead to their own destruction, either by way of war or by way of a, three-headed alien monster golden god. The story does come full circle that humanity's desire to remain at the top of the food chain was always going to be their own destruction, even if it was represented by Godzilla. To reject that and to use our intelligence to live a simpler life is truly better for the survival of the human race, or whatever similar creature will inhabit Earth alongside Godzilla. So I do like that final moment that Hero sacrifices himself to end the old ways of civilization to push forward towards a new way of existence. And with that, he actually does save Earth in the long run. Now, as I've mentioned before, I really do understand the frustration fans have with this trilogy. I'm sure for some, these movies live up to everything they hoped for. However, it just, it kind of just feels like Godzilla and the other monsters are added to the story as a sort of afterthought. This might be a better trilogy if it was some other monster and not Godzilla and Ghidorah, with special guest stars the word Mechagodzilla and the silhouette of Mothra. But there are many nuggets of good ideas here. There's a nugget of a good idea that Godzilla is this unbelievably large force of nature. That does not mean it's better for humanity to abandon the Earth than to put up with him. And there's this concept of these three beings who in many ways look and sound the same, but ultimately have very alien end goals compared to each other. And this is all good stuff. It just feels like a mishmash of typical Godzilla ideas and characters and typical anime series science fiction concepts. It never in three movies really establishes itself as either one thing or the other, or a cohesive melding of both concepts, and that's really the issue with this trilogy. Still, some interesting stuff. It still looks pretty good for the most part. It has some interesting concepts. It's got good music. How they treat Godzilla is this kind of interesting force of nature, but I just wish that it could walk the tightrope between these two concepts a little bit better. That wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday at filmseizure.com. But don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure podcast and Monster Mondays at your favorite podcast providers, as well as YouTube. You can also check out my website, bmovieenema.com, to read new articles every Friday morning. Next time, we go grab a bite to eat with H.G. Wells as Monster Mondays takes a look at the 1976 Burt I. Gordon film, The Food of the Gods. Until next week, stay spooky.